Hi, Deborah. Thank you
Hi.
so much for joining today. I'm so excited to be talking with Deborah Martinez today, a little bit about her and her practice and what sets her apart.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I was an educator for many years, a professor, and I love to educate and really happy to answer some questions and tell you a little bit more about myself.
How did you end up in Chicago and what made it feel like home?
So it was kind of on a whim, actually. I was living in Durham, North Carolina. I had finished law school at Duke in 2006. I was working with a sports agent and we had thought about expanding the business here. My sister was already living here for a few years. So I said, let's just see what the Chicago market has to bring. I came here in 2007. I decided to take the New York bar and move to New York City. That was the plan. And I ended up studying for the bar here, passed it on my first try, fell in love with Chicago while I was here studying. So I decided to stay.
It's the typical Chicago relocation story, isn't it? You went to Duke Law straight into working with athlete agents. It's not exactly the typical path that one would take, but what drew you there and what was one thing the world taught you there that still shows up today?
I chose Duke because of their basketball team at the time. So, which is really funny. Yes, it was also a great law school, but I was always really into sports. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I'm a big Bills fan, and I was just always into sports. That was my path. I took entertainment and sports law, and I was positioning myself with athletes, meeting families, going to AAU tournaments, Amateur Athletic Union. I ended up being very lucky and meeting great people. So it really taught me how to persevere. I was doing this at a time when there were not many women in that realm of the sports field, and it was tough. It definitely taught me how to be tough and persevere, and obviously that maintains now, especially being a true solo. It's maintained my grittiness, if you will.
There's a lot of conversation about solo practitioner versus big firms. And what do people get wrong about going out on their own?
I see this as twofold. I think that the good and the bad of it are the same. So people think, oh, you go on your own. So what's great is you can make your own hours and you don't have to answer to anybody. But guess what? You also have to make your own hours and you don't answer to anybody but yourself and your clients. So the good is that you make your own hours. The bad is that you make your own hours and that you end up working on weekends sometime. You end up working in the evenings, but I can also take off at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and go to the river walk. It does take a lot to run a solo. And the not answering to anybody is also good, but also bad because you have to be accountable to yourself and your clients only. And so you have to be sure that you can maintain scheduling and do that for yourself.
Definitely. You've deliberately focused your practice on real estate and probate and foreclosure. What made you commit to that combination?
To be clear about the estate planning and the probate, I'm of counsel with Bielski Chapman, and they specialize in trusts, estate planning, wills, and probate is when someone passes and you have to go to court to deal with all of that. Now, I actually started in real estate in foreclosure. I was recruited by a company that was specializing in loan modifications at the height of when everybody was dealing with foreclosures. This was around 2009, 2010, and I was recruited to be in-house and deal with all of the clients who were facing foreclosure. And that's really was a tough situation in time. I had hundreds of clients. I saved hundreds of homes, and it was emotionally really draining, but I felt very rewarded. And starting in that field led me to realize that so many people that owned homes didn't understand their ownership rights, didn't understand taxes, didn't understand who owned their loans. And I started meeting more attorneys who dealt in real estate transactions. And I remember some of them saying, oh, are you an agent with a title company? I'm like, what does that mean? So I started realizing there's a connection in all things real estate. And then dealing with the probate, there are a lot of people who, when a loved one passes or a property's in a trust or somebody's going through a divorce, that the real estate is a prime asset and you need to have someone who's well versed in what goes on in the background with that too. There's a lot that goes on and they're all connected. And so if I'm handling your file and I see that something comes up on title, I know where to go, who to talk with, how to help cure that, whether it's negotiating a short payoff in demolition court or if there's a city lien. It really does help to have that varied experience, especially when dealing with sellers.
While we're talking about buyers and sellers, I'd love to jump into this and see what are the most common mistakes buyers and sellers make in a real estate transaction. And it's not from carelessness, it's simply because they don't know.
Well, we could talk about this for 7 hours. Really, we could. I think it's just communicating with your attorney. I'm happy to speak with buyers and sellers before they go under contract, or at least right away. Most people in this situation, it's first time selling, first time buying. And I don't think many people know what to ask. So I help draw that out of them. A lot of buyers don't know additional costs and fees they're going to have. Most buyers don't know anything about title insurance. And why it's so important to have an attorney, make sure that you're covered and you own the property free and clear, and make sure that you're talking and communicating with your attorney. With sellers, I'm seeing that they don't know what their bottom line is going to be. Not that it's really a mistake, but they go in thinking one thing and then come out thinking another, and then they're really disappointed. So I like to make sure that I talk with an agent up front about providing a net sheet to the sellers and making sure that the sellers have that expectation. Another issue I see with sellers is that they're not the correct owner of record. And I see this more and more. I recently have a seller who went through a divorce, had a trust in her and her husband's name. They quit claimed it into her trust. There's a very lengthy settlement agreement that delineates certain things, and that none of this was told to me. So I pull title, I get the title back, I see all this. Now we're having to take time to track down old trusts, making sure that this was put in this correctly, tracking down husbands, wives, spouses. That communication with your attorney, say, well, it's the seller's name on the contract, but you're not really the seller. The seller is really the trust. You're the trustee. So you are going to sign the paperwork, but we have to make sure that these documents were done correctly, that you have the right to sell. It starts with communication with your attorney, but I see a lot of sellers that aren't the correct seller.
Wow.
And I'm having to backtrack, and then we want to close in 3-4 weeks, but it's taking me 2-3 weeks to get these documents together. And so it pushes everything.
And that's a good example of how much time that you have to put into the transaction. All right, we're back. We're talking Chicago real estate and the landscape of it. So, Deborah, building code violations are something buyers often don't think about until they're already under contract. But how common is that in the Chicago market?
Not that common, to be honest. And there's a difference between administrative hearings and then when they come up in circuit court or demolition. A lot of investors that are buying properties that they want to rehab, they're going to deal with this a little bit more than a regular buyer or first-time home buyer. It's more prevalent in the fixing and flipping arena. Oftentimes, the buyers, if they're an investor, they will know about it. But in the off chance that they don't, I will see that come up on a title commitment that the sellers will provide to me. And then we want to make sure that we get it cured. Or if the buyer is going to take it subject to the building code, sometimes it's already in demolition court. And the clients want me to make sure that we can either get it out of demolition court or make sure that the seller cures it ahead of time. Now that's going to really affect the transaction and the timeliness of it. But I deal with a lot of investor clients who want to have me actually go in court and see if we can get the demolition stayed. When we say building court, one of the items that comes up a lot, as I've mentioned, is demolition court. And so what demolition court is that the city is ready to demolish a property. There might be already a court order, or it may be in demolition court. And so they want some major items to be cured and fixed right away. And there might be an investor who says, hey, I'm going to get this property for a steal. I can put in the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to rehab it so that the city won't demolish it. But I want to make sure that the city will lift that order before I go in and purchase the property. So I have to go into court, and I often do as a separate service I provide, and make sure that we can get the demolition order stayed through the closing. And then I have to work directly with the buyer, usually a buyer investor, before they even purchase the property, to make sure that the court will allow them to proceed and do the work on the property.
Foreclosure carries a lot of fear and stigma from a legal standpoint. What do homeowners actually have on their side that they don't often realize?
Banks don't want to take your property, generally. They really want to work with you. I also see a lot of people facing foreclosure that are thinking they have 3-4 months and they're going to kick them out of their home. Something that a lot of people don't know, if you show up to court, that's an advantage for you. Whether you use me or another attorney to help you along that process, you at least need to show up in court. And typically you can ask for time. You have time to respond to the bank. If you're working on some type of loss mitigation, it's really important to show up to court. It can really buy you a lot of time. I had some clients that we were in court for years. What a lot of buyers think is that they have 3-4 months and they're going to be kicked out. That's not the case, but you don't want to ignore it, and you want to make sure that you're talking to the right people. One thing that a lot of people facing foreclosure do is ignore certain documents that come in. They think that they can't afford any type of loss mitigation or a loan modification, and they can sometimes. Most often they can't. The banks really want to work with you. You get in that hole and people get very depressed. They get scared. Reach out, show up to court, read the paperwork that's coming in. You have more time than you think, and there are a lot of options to save your home, or at least stay in it for a lot longer till you can figure out the next path for you. If you ignore the court orders and you ignore the summons and you ignore things, you can be kicked out. But if you show up and you answer and you communicate with the other side and you communicate with the bank, it's not a 2, 3, 4 month time frame. It can be a year, it can be 2 years. One other thing I want to add is, just because you're working with the bank to keep your home and you're doing loss mitigation and you're negotiating with them, make sure that you are also following up on what's happening in court. Those are two separate things. So people think, oh, I'm negotiating with my bank, they're not doing anything. Meanwhile, the attorneys for the bank have thousands of cases. They're not paying attention to your case. So they're going to court and they're trying to foreclose on you. Meanwhile, you think that you're handling loss mitigation and you're dealing with the bank directly. A lot of times they will stop the proceedings, but not always. And I've seen that happen a lot. So it's really important that you're staying on top of everything. Best to get an attorney if you can. But of course, if you cannot, just make sure that you're staying on top of both sides of it if you are engaged in loss mitigation.
Working in estate and probate matters is something that you also do. Can you walk us through a real life example of how an estate or probate issue surfaced in a real estate transaction and what happened because an attorney, you specifically, were involved?
Did have one instance where a seller, again, said they were the seller. This actually, they did not open probate, but the actual owner of record, their mother, had passed away. There were 3 siblings. They told me there were 2. We had to track down the 3rd sibling. It was quite a hassle. Had they gone to probate and opened it in probate, we could have gotten what's called an administrator and letters of office from the court, which basically grants one person the right to sell real estate, and among a slew of other things as well, but for our purposes, to sell the real estate. And that way I can deal with one person and it can avoid having to track down all these other siblings, and then I have to get them to sign all of these documents. Every single person has to sign off on it. It can be quite complicated. Going to probate and having that one court order makes it a lot easier for me to deal with one particular party. So I had another situation where we did engage in probate, and the young lady who had one brother, she was allowed to have the administrative papers, and then she said, oh, I have everything from my mom, paid off everything, there's nothing else in the estate. Well, through probate, we've got 2 and 3 other creditors who've come forward now and they're owed money. Once the probate was opened, those creditors are aware of it, and then they can go after the estate through there. It was fine, we were able to pay it from the proceeds, but had we not done that, there could have been an issue with title for the buyer. But those are 2 recent situations.
The most common question people are always asking is, do I need an attorney? Instead of you answering why, do you think you could share a real life scenario where not having an attorney has cost someone significantly?
Well, I wouldn't know necessarily because they've used me, so I can't say what's happened when you haven't. I did recently have a young couple that was purchasing here, and they had bought and sold in another state that doesn't use attorneys. And the 3rd conversation I ever had with them, they said, oh my goodness, I wish I had an attorney. I think it was Michigan. I wish I had an attorney. My deed was never recorded. When I went to sell my property, I didn't have good title. We had to make a claim through the title company. I didn't know what was happening. It took 3 or 4 months longer than we anticipated. I wish I knew you then. I said, well, I'm not licensed in Michigan, but I also can review contracts in other states. I can at least review them and tell you questions to ask and help along with that. I can't step in front of a judge or practice in states I'm not licensed in, but in states where they don't use attorneys, I've actually advised clients on how to protect their earnest money. I did in Indiana. I saved some buyers possibly losing $10,000 of their earnest money on a recent transaction where they don't use attorneys there that often. I'm protecting your earnest money, making sure you understand how taxes work, how you're going to have to pay your taxes, tax prorations, and most importantly, making sure that you have good and marketable title and the person selling the property to you is the correct person and they have the right to sell it. They don't owe anybody anything else that could come back and fall on you.
Can you give us an example of a transaction that looked simple on the surface, but turned into something very complex, and having you as legal representation made all of the difference?
I never go into any transaction thinking it's going to be easy because I don't know where the wood is. If I think that way, it never is. I've had situations where I've represented a buyer and there was an HOA. The seller had misrepresented what the HOA dues were. There were special assessments that were being conducted that the buyer didn't know about. I've had situations where a buyer goes in and conducts an inspection. The inspection has revealed a whole slew of items that need to be repaired. We're going in as is, but there's a foundation issue. I had one where they lifted up the floors. It was new construction and there were magazines on where the subfloor was supposed to be. Magazines and newspapers holding it up. I've had some interesting things happen. This is a good one. I had a seller, I think it's going to be a great transaction, and the buyer died the day before we sold. And it was very, very tragic, but we had protected the earnest money from the buyer. So the seller received enough compensation to keep the property on the market. The same sale, there was never a water meter put into the property. So I had to contact the water department, and good thing that I knew how to reach who I needed to reach. They got it installed. This was during COVID, and it was new construction during COVID when the property was originally purchased. And I did not represent the sellers when they purchased. They never knew that they had to get this water meter installed, but I was able to speed it along. I've had so many situations that you think it's going to be easy. I try not to even think that. I've had sellers who aren't the proper seller. I had to track down somebody's ex-spouse in another country, and they were not amenable to signing documents. So I had to go ahead and go back to when they were in divorce court, family law court, however you want to call it, family court. Ended up having to get a judicial deed from the judge who said that he was going to transfer the property essentially through the judge, since we could not find the husband to sign off on the deed that should have been signed off on from the divorce. People say, I got the property in my divorce, but they never make sure that the deed is transferred over to them properly, especially people who go into these things without attorneys. I see that happen all the time. And I was trying to track down someone in Turkey for 3 months and then finally had to get a judicial deed so that we could sell the property because the deed was still in both parties' names. Without an attorney, it never would have sold. Without an attorney, so many people would have lost their earnest money. Without an attorney, deeds don't get recorded. Water certificates don't get pulled. People owe all types of money that they didn't realize they owed. You need to have an attorney. Even if you're in a state that doesn't use attorneys, try to find one to at least review the contract with you. It's so important. This is probably the largest purchase or sale of your life.
How do you help your clients understand your time, expertise, and liability protection you bring is worth every dollar they're spending?
I do send engagement letters to buyers and sellers, which will delineate my role. And I say, please take a look at this and make sure you understand it. Let me know if you have any questions. It says what my expectations are of them as a client, and then also what their expectation can be of me.
Amazing. Hello, everybody. We're back with Deborah Martinez. We're going to touch a little bit on real estate agents and the real estate transaction. What's the most important thing a new real estate agent can do to help protect their clients?
I'm so glad you mentioned new real estate agents. I love working with new real estate agents. I was a professor for many years, and education is in my blood. I love to teach and educate. And a lot of people in this industry think they don't want to bother the attorneys, but I love when a new agent will ask me questions. The number one thing they can do to protect their client from a legal standpoint is to introduce them early on to a great real estate attorney. So that would be number one, maintaining their education and then asking us the questions that they don't know. It's okay to not know something. I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to ensure that you have the best education. If there's something that you don't know and you can't reach your managing broker, don't go in it blind. Ask me, ask your attorney, make sure that you have the right answers. You want to protect your client, and it's better to ask for help in this situation than seek forgiveness later.
How should buyers and sellers think about the difference between a real estate agent and a real estate attorney? Where does one role end and the other begin?
So you probably won't speak to, probably is the operative word, right? You probably won't speak to or meet an attorney until you either have an offer on your home or you've submitted an offer. If you're even thinking about buying or selling, I'm happy to talk with you or talk with your agent. It doesn't really begin and end. It should be symbiotic. An agent will meet with you and show you the home or list your home and do all the things that an agent needs to do, get your home ready. I'm not going to be out on showings with you. I'm not going to be at your open house. But when you have the contract in place and it's been accepted or you've accepted it, that's when the attorney typically comes into play and protects your investment, protects your earnest money, negotiates negotiates on behalf of you for tax credits, regular closing cost credits, inspection requests. We do the negotiations. And I actually will show up at the table if you're a buyer and go over all of your loan documents, go over all of your mortgage information, go over the title documents, everything that the seller's provided. When I represent a seller, I will make sure that I help you sign all the documents that you need to. Usually sellers just want to know their bottom line. I really like to make sure that if an agent is providing a net sheet, as they should to a seller, that I take a look at it. I'm happy to take a look, review it with you, make sure all the costs and fees are on there so a seller is getting a really super accurate bottom line. I prepare the transfer documents, meaning your deed and things like that. The real estate agent doesn't have anything to do with preparing documents beyond the contract unless they're helping me obtain transfer stamps or taxes, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. There are a lot of behind the scenes things that your agent and I will work with. And I think that I really love working hand in hand with an agent. Like I said, it doesn't end when you have an attorney. We then start to work together, help each other to get you to the finish line, whether it's getting your proceeds and walking away with a check, or whether it's walking away with keys and good title to your home.
Your clients love that you go above and beyond, and you are an active listener. In a profession that seems so transactional, what does that actually look like in your practice?
Again, communication is key in this. And I think agents and clients think, oh, I don't want to bother my attorney. Oh, I don't want to talk to them. Some do it too much. That's okay. The above and beyond is just making sure, look, I'm not a lender. I try to stay in my lane. I'm not an agent. I try to stay in my lane. But I know enough and I'm in good communication with those parties in your transaction to make sure that you as a buyer are aware of everything that's going on, everything that you need to provide. And you as a seller know what it's going to take, how much time you're going to have to dedicate to this, how involved you're going to have to be. I like to stay involved, and I want to make sure my communication with you on day one to closing day is going to make sure that we don't have any delays and we don't have any issues at the closing table, and that I don't have to bother you. You don't have to bother me the day of closing, and we can get in and get it done.
If a real estate agent or a new real estate agent is watching this and thinking, I want to build a stronger relationship with my real estate attorney, what does a great referral partnership look like from your side?
I really like to know the people that I'm working with and get along with you. It's not just about sending me buyers, sending me sellers. I want to be there for you, and I want to make sure that you're learning along the way. You're out in front of buyers and sellers, that you're valuable as well. I go to sporting events with my realtors. I take them, we go out to dinner, we go for drinks, we talk about real life things, and we talk about what they need to do to build their practice and their business. It's got to be symbiotic. We can't always be taking, we have to give. Huge advocate of education. It's invaluable. Most people spend top dollar for it. If I'm here to help and guide you and give you information and help you be a better realtor, that's what I want to do. If we get along the process and go to a few Cubs games or Bills games, even better.
If you had to give one piece of advice to someone in the Chicago area who's about to sign their real estate contract and is debating whether they really need an attorney, what would you tell them?
1,000,000% you need an attorney. Don't even hesitate. It's very little cost. It's not going to break the bank.
What's something completely unrelated to law that you're genuinely passionate about? Something that most people who work with you probably wouldn't know.
Well, if you work with me, you're going to know I'm a Bills fan in all things Buffalo. I'm also licensed in New York and practice in the upstate New York area as well. Real estate is very different there. It's far different. It's almost the opposite of what it is here. So my brain is always like this. What you may not know is that I'm a huge animal lover. And the first portion of my life, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was pre-med in undergrad so that I could become a veterinarian. But I'm such a bleeding heart that when I shadowed veterinarians and would see animals in pain or we had to euthanize them, I was crying every day. So I realized this might not be for me. Even though I'm a tough cookie, I have a soft spot for animals.
As any good human would. So if someone is watching this right now and wondering, how can I get in contact with Deborah? I want to work with her. Would you mind sharing your contact information?
Absolutely. You can find me at dmmlawoffices.com. That's my website. I can be reached at 630-968-2120 or via email at deborah@dmmlawoffices.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deborah, for joining me today. I appreciate you being here, and I cannot wait till the next time. I hope everyone watching this took a little piece of advice away and gives Deborah a call.
Thank you.